I just have the feeling. That's why I'm going to keep away from you.
You know...
What?
I wonder why I'm like that.
Like what?
I'm never thinking about anybody, except myself. You don't think I'd go without you?
You mean that, Stan?
Absolutely. You satisfied?
Oh, Stan, I don't care for nothing now. Nothing in the world.
You're not a regular MD, are you?
Of course not. But anything my patients reveal to me is as sacred as though it were given under the seal of the confessional. That clear?
All right. You don't have to get on a soapbox. I'm going to be strictly on the level about this whole thing myself.
Will you get out of here? I should have known you were that kind of a...
It takes one to catch one. Listen to me. I'm no good. I never pretended to be. But I love you. I'm a hustler. I've always been one. But I love you. I may be the thief of the world, but with you, I've always been on the level.
Every day I'm hustling. All right, welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza. It is the last episode ever? No, just of season 1, episode 40, Nightmare Alley. I am here, as always, with J. Andrew, Carney Name Here World. Really stepped up on that one.
Yes, because step right up, come right down. We're gonna show you the greatest show on earth. That's right. We're gonna talk about Nightmare Alley, and let's go.
All right, Conan Noir Neutron, the host of Photonic Reversal, and Conan Neutron and the Secret Friends, Carney Neutron and the Secret Friends.
Very good.
Yeah.
I see we're going to run with this bit for a while, and I'm okay.
And Eileen Jones, film critic at Jacobin, and who also writes for and hosts a podcast called Film Suck. We wanted to get you on here for a while, and I'm happy this is the movie that we picked because we're starting out. We started out this podcast with Kiss Me Deadly, which obviously is one type of noir, and then this is a very different type of noir. So it's nice to kind of bookend noir. And then we haven't really done any for Noirvember, which I like as a name. But, we've kind of been on a... Really, you don't like Noirvember as a... What's your beef with it?
I love it for what it's worth. So memorable and true. It's dark. Come on. It's a dark month.
It is a dark month. And it's like,
And to be fair, we also did some neo-noirs.
Yeah. And
we've been kind of sort of noiring, noiring around the edges.
At least you framed it with noir. That's the main thing. I'm still worried that I don't have a Carney name. I'm still stuck back on the earlier issue. Damn it! I don't know, Queenie. There's got to be something I can come up with.
We'll kick you right off this show if you don't get one soon. So
I
took the bullet, and I'm the geek.
The Geek. That was Tyrone Power. He named his plane the Geek.
Really?
Yeah, I think he really identified with this guy. It's a perfect
well
for him.
You know how it goes. You either die a grifter or you live long enough to become the geek.
That's true. So do we all love this movie? I mean, let's make sure we are all on the same page there.
I did.
Great.
I definitely. I think that one of the most interesting types of noir movies, and also just movies in general from this era, is when they take somebody's life, like they try to encapsulate someone's entire life within the plot of the movie, and they show like the rise and fall. Now, I think this movie is interesting because they dedicated like, 80% of it to the rise, and then they left the last 20% for the fall. And I also find it interesting that the Hays Code, we've talked about this, I think, endlessly on this podcast, but the Hays Code kind of it wasn't just a code that censored what you could and couldn't have in the plot of a movie. Like it censored the actual like meat of what a movie plot could be. So like, the parts of it that were like the ending of a movie, if somebody's kind of an anti-hero or a villain, they have to get what's coming to them. And the kind of definition of that, it seems like in most cases was either jail or death. You know what I mean? Like if someone's a criminal, they go to jail. If someone is a bad enough criminal, there is really no punishment but death because they've transgressed. And it's interesting that he kind of gets neither. I mean, he becomes the geek, which obviously is a punishment, probably worse than jail in some way. You know what I mean? But then he also kind of gets rescued at the very end by Molly, and she kind of, seems to, he does obviously not pull him out of it because I don't think there is pulling somebody out of that. But it does seem like he kind of gets redemption as almost like the Pete character.
There's a
that's what I was going to say, though, is that that's the unhappy angle, is he's clearly living out Pete's fate. So now he's going to be the raging alcoholic who's only being saved by the good-hearted wife. So she's going to get to be Xena and he's going to get to be Pete. So that's less happy than I think a lot of people are thinking. A lot of people are thinking like, she'll save him. And it's like, yeah, look at him. And it is, you mentioned, in a message to us that the makeup on Tyrone Power is really good to show him as an alcoholic wreck. And it really is. Why is it so good? They only do stuff to his eyes. It's fabulous.
Yeah, and it kind of, it's better almost than like The Irishman, where they actually did the full CGI to age everybody. Like, it's like they go to, I mean, it's also because his face is so expressive as it is. He kind of has like an Eddie Munster face in general, because he has the pointed ears and he has like that kind of like vampiric
you're
mouth.
right.
But like, I mean, handsome guy, but still kind of has that going that when they finally do capitalize on that side of his features, I think, and really like dial in the eye bags and everything. I think it really does well.
And they've clearly done something crazy where they pulled his eyes down so that there's all these whites at the bottom, which I don't know how they did that, but it's very effective. Yeah.
That's what I say when I get up in the morning. I really dialed in the eye bags this morning.
And they've got to do something because he's too handsome.
I do want to throw in. I got to throw in like I didn't quite realize this because I've skipped a lot of old movies in general in my life, which is a downright shame of mine. I fully admit that.
Watched far too many 80s movies, 90s movies.
Yeah, I do watch far too many 80s movies.
He wasn't joking.
One of the things that I realized while drawing Tyrone Power was the fact that he was a huge inspiration to comic book artists of the Golden Age. So you can see Tyrone Power in Captain Marvel, in Bruce Wayne, in even Superman. Like you can see the artist pulling from him because he does have such a great expressive face, those strong eyebrows. I mean, just going back looking at the work of and I'm going to blank on everybody's name, but the work of those great Golden Age artists, they really were pulling from Tyrone Power a lot. So just shout out to them. A little thing I've noticed, just we don't have any examples. Sorry, let's move on.
He also was a very different type of actor than this. Like that's an important thing to note, that like this wasn't the kind of movie that he would do. Like he's a dude that like went to the war, like he went to war,
and he got buried for that reason.
Exactly.
For decades. Yeah.
People were not looking. It'd be like, I don't know, like The Rock taking doing Leaving Las Vegas.
Absolutely.
Like what?
Yeah, he did swashbucklers. He did.
But I think that now, I think that now one thing that we have is we don't have the studio system necessarily. I mean, the studio system is kind of coming back in a way, but you don't have the studio system where somebody finds an actor like Zanuck at Fox, finds this actor and pulls them out from wherever they are and goes, listen, this is going to be your career. This is going to be your career, kid. Listen to me. And then kind of maps out their career for them. They don't get much agency in it. And they kind of push them into these stock roles. So for Tyrone Power, that stock role was like the romantic lead, and you know, Zanuck wouldn't hear of anything at all. Like you could build up enough clout and like I guess social capital, and I mean obviously like monetary capital, but like social capital and like whatever to kind of demand that your roles get switched a little bit. But it seems like this movie came from Tyrone Power, like reading the book and saying, this is a perfect way for me to kind of switch up what I've been doing, because I don't just want to be a romantic lead forever. This isn't a sustainable career path for me. And just deciding to do something totally opposite of that, where he's just like the most despicable kind of scumbag that's selling everybody a bill of goods, conning them, and you know, and really pulling like every single scam known to man, to the point where in doing my research for this, there's an Eddie Muller clip that I'll play later on, where he's talking about how con artists used to say, I'm a friend of Stan Carlisle. Like that was the way that they would say, hey, you can't get me with this scam. I'm my own kind of scammer. So this movie took on a cult life after being released, but a cult life through scammers and hustlers using that name to kind of point out, hey, I'm one of you for decades before this film got resurfaced.
And so, you know, Tyrone Power, he really seems to come to life with this kind of role. He gets to play something semi-similar in Witness for the Prosecution, which is his last full role before he dies at 44. And he's the long con. He's got to be completely charming, but there's got to be something kind of cheap and false about him. And then, yeah, he's the con artist. And by then he looks like hell. He was an alcoholic. And his drinking.
Yeah, didn't need the eye makeup anymore.
He didn't even need the eye makeup. Exactly. Because, you know, he was such a serious actor. He had roots in like, for generations back to Ireland. I forget, 18th century Ireland or some damn thing with the first Tyrone Power. So he really had a lot at stake in showing what a great actor he was. And he's got to have been a frustrated guy. He clearly was. He even had the romantic case of ditching wives because they didn't have sons. He ditched 2 wives because they didn't have sons, and he wanted a son to be the next Tyrone Power. That's
he didn't go deep.
He was.
He was really living through his own Nightmare Alley there.
He was doing his own Nightmare Alley.
Nightmare Alley.
Which, by the way, the reason that the book, I think, was named Nightmare Alley was that in the book itself, he has this recurring dream where he's being chased down an alley, and we don't get to hear.
Never
we don't get to see this.
Yeah, it's never in here.
He kind of takes the name without actually explaining that there's this recurring dream, and he realizes that like fear. Wait, I have the quote that I wrote down last night when I was listening to it, but he has the he has like this dream about a dark alley that's running through, and he says, find out what they're afraid of and sell it back to them. How was the geek made? Fear. He was afraid of sobering up. But what turned him into a drunk? Fear. And he's talking about how the thing that audiences most want to see is something that they're afraid of, and then they want to be obviously kind of saved from it, and realize that it's something that's non-lasting. But if you can make people feel terrified in the moment, they'll hand you money. So he kind of compares this to his own dream that he has, where he's being chased down an alley and there's light at the end of the alley, and it's just like nightmare. And there's this whole passage about it that just gets totally ignored by the movie. And they're like, Nightmare Alley, like the book.
Too bad, because that would have been a great scene. I'm surprised.
Yeah. I mean,
that would be perfect noir. Wow.
And there's plenty of like kind of like daring, cool noirish choices, but like it is funny that I never even occurred to me that like the title is just.
It just sounded like a noir title.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah.
Supposedly, according to an old lady whose clip I watched the other day, he was bi, maybe, but that's I don't know if that was just like an older. Yeah, well, it was an old lady speculating and then going, this is one of the funniest clips I've seen researching for the show.
Yeah, that's the best kind of Criterion Channel extras, is an old lady
when they're speculating.
Yeah,
but she's not the only one. There was a lot of speculation. Tons.
No.
His best friend was Cesar Romero, who was
the Joker.
Who was known to be a quote unquote lifelong bachelor, and everyone said he was gay.
Fun-loving guy. He was
supposed to have had an affair with Errol Flynn. He was, the word was sort of out in an underground.
Now that's swashbuckling.
That is some serious swashbuckling energy there. Yeah.
But you wanted to talk specifically, Forrest, about that one woman that on the that one her theory.
Her theory.
Oh no! So it was the Cesar Romero thing, and she was talking about how they were best friends, and then the clip takes I didn't save the clip because I was like, yeah, this is a little bit you know, it's just some old lady speculating. But she goes from going, oh, my sister dated him, and then he was like, oh, they were hanging out a lot, and then I danced with Cesar Romero, and then he's like, and they were gay. They were gay together, and I was like, what? Like,
yeah,
all right. Okay. But that's like when you're old. I feel like when you're old enough, and people are just like filming your like old Hollywood stories, you can do that, and everyone's like, all right, yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
They're all dead. Who cares? Yeah.
I can't remember. I'm trying to remember who it was, but there was like this one interview thing where I don't remember if it was no, it wasn't Stevie Wonder. It was Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones had an interview towards the end of his life where he was just kind of like outing everybody that he knew.
Oh, I think I read that.
Oh yeah, that's an incredible article. And actually,
yeah,
the documentary on him is quite fascinating as well. That I think is his daughter largely filmed, and very interesting just because he's an interesting dude in music. But yeah, that is a dude that, to put it bluntly, was out of fucks to give.
Yeah.
He's like, all right, what do you want to know?
Well, and we got to say, you know, it's not like, you know, given that we're such contempo people that we don't care. But it's the secrecy and the fascination over of living your whole life faking around and dating Lana Turner or whatever. And maybe you don't want to, you know, that's what keeps being the recurring fascination is, wow, how did you go your whole life without just the urge to write the secret diary, to do something?
Well, I think it's also the fact that, you know, this whole life is mapped out for you, right? Like, and we'll see this in a clip that I have. The only real person that was left alive was Colleen Gray, who played Molly. When Criterion and like, you know, when this movie was rediscovered by Eddie Muller, who I like a lot because I got really fascinated by noir films because I took a shout out to my professor Greg Bray at New Paltz, but he had a study that we took where we watched I think like 15 noir movies in 15 weeks. Wow. And it was called 90 Minutes to Die. It was a really fun class. But Eddie Muller had written this Dark City book, which ended up being the textbook for this class. And he ended up being the one who resurfaced Nightmare Alley, I guess, and was like the first person that was allowed to kind of play it on TV after Fox had like very much kind of been like, listen, we want to forget this movie ever happened. We don't want Tyrone Power looked at in this light, because we've kind of mapped out his whole career for him. And then obviously he died tragically young, and kind of, I think that took a toll on him more than just, I mean, you know, whatever speculation anyone wants to have about his sexuality. It's also, you're trapped in this box where, you know, somebody at a studio who isn't necessarily a creative person and is just kind of deciding what movies are going to make money is going, no, I don't think anything that you do that you actually want to do, any passion project is going to make money. I want you to keep swashbuckling. Not like that, but I want you to keep swashbuckling. I want you to keep being the romantic lead. You know, we can't do anything, like you can't do anything else. And the fact that you're under contract for, you know, like, and if they reject that contract, suddenly you're out of work and you're not going to get hired by anyone else because it's essentially a monopoly that these studios have. So I think that more than anything else probably really destroyed his, you know, his self-esteem, I'm sure too. But I wanted to play this because the central question, obviously, of this movie is, how does a man become a geek? And Criterion couldn't find too many extras to, I think, really include with this movie because, you know, everyone had either passed away by this point and Fox was burying it when it was around. So there wasn't many like interviews on TV they got, or like on the radio or anything. So they kind of had to scrape the bottom of the barrel with where they got their content from. So one of the things that they did is they interviewed a carny, like a carny or a performer at one of the side shows that was kind of a historian that does like a whole of these side shows. And I found it really fascinating. He has a 2-minute clip on how a man becomes a geek. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to play from like a historical perspective.
And then you had the Ghillie Shows, which were the smaller shows that traveled by, in the early days, horse and wagon, and then later on by truck. And the reason they're called Ghillie is because all the stuff would be loaded on a train, and then when you got into town, you'd hire wagons to bring it all out to the lot. And it was those kind of smaller units that were playing the smaller towns. They were a little more desperate, and that's where you have things like the Geek Act show up. Stronger acts playing for a less sophisticated audience, and the games often were completely fixed. And there was a little more of a criminal element in the operation. And it was those shows that kind of gave all carnivals and circuses a bad name. They're what is known as heat merchants, because that's what they brought. And then dime museums were these permanent sideshows, not unlike the Ripley's, believe it or not, that we have today in various communities, except they have live performers in them, in addition to the strange, unusual displays. And people would read about, various parts of the world that they'd never be able to travel to. So the dime museums could bring little bits and pieces. They would have, relics from the Holy Land, some real and some, completely fake, depending upon the size and the quality of the show. And one of the acts was the wild men of Borneo, savages from South the Islands, cannibals. And the more sensational you can make it, the more interesting. And they often were completely fake. And sometimes you want to take it further. It has been sort of lost to history. But someone had the idea of making them even more of a savage by biting the head off of a live chicken or some other animal, snakes, skinning a snake live with their teeth. And it was shocking. Now, the problem is, who wants to do that? So you either rely upon someone who's mentally deficient and doesn't know that that is a deplorable thing to do, or you rely upon someone who's sort of down and out. And you find yourself a drunk. And you say, no, listen, it's a fake act. You take and you have a razor blade. And you pick up the animal and you scream and yell and you slit the throat and let the blood flow and just pretend to eat it. And if you'll do that, we'll pay you. You have a place to sleep. You get a little money and all you can drink. And you put the bottle out there. And once they get comfortable doing that, you threaten to take the bottle away unless they do it for real. And they will.
Damn. I mean, like, I know all about that, but you hear it laid out like that, it's like, oh, geez.
Yeah. And he's sufficiently uncomfortable talking about it, which, I'm sure, because there are I watched the whole interview with him, and there are a lot of really, everything about, I think, carnivals is kind of exploitative, but probably less so than in some cases than we've been led to believe, in the sense of it's not like you could get a job as someone who has a long criminal record and everything else if people knew about it. Less so in the 1800s or the early 1900s, where people kind of talked and this stuff was kind of everywhere. And the carnival was kind of a non-judgmental atmosphere where if you showed up and you did your job and, you were interested in being on stage and all of this stuff, then people wouldn't really ask a lot of questions, and you could actually make a decent living in a lot of cases, with a comfortable place to sleep and food and, stuff provided. And of course that wasn't always the case, but a lot of times it was. And I think, as socialists, it probably is the most raw form of exploitation that you could possibly think of, because a lot of them also were mentally deficient, as he says, and going through severe mental illness and stuff. But at the same time, this is going on at the same time that the factory workers are factory workers are working in sweatshops that burn down on a regular basis. And so I don't know. So he kind of had a sympathetic air with a lot of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, the second it got to that, he got incredibly uncomfortable, because it's an incredibly uncomfortable subject. And then the few pictures they really have of geeks, a lot of times it's a black person, because those are people that are, in the worst form of poverty at this point. And, it's rare to find, you can find white geeks, but a lot of times there's that racial element added.
And notice how in the movie they keep him off in shadow. The geek, you don't see the first one. You don't. The first one is always off. Either he's screaming and suffering from the DTs or some form of mental break, but he's always off in shadow, so you can't quite get a full look at him.
Shrouded in mystery, kind of away from everyone else.
I'm gonna say probably suffering from DTs, because they do say early on, which is the thing that connects it to the Great Stanton as a character. Later on, they say, "Oh, he used to be on top of the charts," and By the way, fuck you for that comment, Conan. No, but, so I think that, so I'm gonna probably say it was, you know, it was a severe form of alcoholism that he was suffering from, because I think that, you know, to get to the top of the charts, it probably is a story a lot like you know, the Great Stanton story, but I mean, but I don't think it necessarily was in all cases. And
no, but it seems clear in the movie that that's the pattern.
And it's like
it's alcoholics.
What do you call it? Like an Ouroboros? Like the infinity thing, like it like links the beginning and the end in a way that like I didn't actually catch it first. I was like, oh yeah, yeah. It's nice to see them do a creative, like film noir is sort of known for that doom, getting the feeling of doom and fatedness through flashback structures. So you start with a guy on death row, or you start with, you know, William Holden already dead in the swimming pool but still narrating, or whatever, and then loop around. But in
which is another movie that we covered on the show and had a good time with.
Yeah, that is a good one. But this one just keeps having all of these, you know, just Stan's fascination with the geek that he doesn't even understand. And there's so many recurring patterns, the tarot cards, all the rest of it, to tell you know exactly where it's going, or at least I think you can pick it up. The sense of foreboding.
Well, there's also this, there's an Icarus. I mean, it's kind of the Icarus thing, right? Like he flew too high and kind of you know, bounced off the sun in this case, like, because you know that last line where he's like, you know, how does a guy get so low? And he's like, oh well, he aimed too high. And I think in this case there's that double meaning where he aimed too high as he literally aimed to replace God. And I don't think that was necessarily what the book itself was trying to imply, because you know, it was written by like a lifelong skeptic who was deeply interested in spiritualism, but also was also just
Lewis.
He was also just too cynical to really ever get into spiritualism. So it's funny, I guess his work.
Are you sure? Maybe we're reading different sources, but I read that this maddening alteration. He was so desperate. The poor guy. He's a paranoiac. He's got tuberculosis. He's an alcoholic. He's mentally tormented to the point that he can't stand it. And the thing I read was he would try anything. He tried Dianetics. He was an early Scientologist. Yeah.
But then also spent his time debunking that.
But you're right. He would debunk with the other hand. Yeah.
So he desperately wanted to find something that he felt like he could believe in, and then kind of would get to that point and realize, you know, cynically that everything. Yeah. So his life was kind of spent in that, and it kind of, I mean, he died of cancer of the tongue at and he committed suicide because that wasn't going to get any better. But
he was also going blind. He also had a recurrence of tuberculosis, so he was dying of like 3 things. Which,
you know, if you're gonna off yourself, that probably like is the time to do it.
But if I just real quick on that main point of like, you know, that line, like I think there's a very clear moment in the movie where it's like a serial killer or something, like you could stop. You could stop right now. Like you've made a good living for yourself. But no, he's like, no, I'm gonna go for the big fish. I'm going one more. And everyone's like, maybe don't. Maybe don't do that. And he's like, nah, I got this.
Yeah.
And he's got
it's the escalating contempt. He already starts off with it. Like I like it. Because why does he like circus life? Because you know, you're not one of the yokels. You get to look at them and feel superior.
And gamble away their life savings, right? It's the same thing. You feel like, oh well, you know, I can't possibly lose at this point. I've won too much. Like, well, that's not really.
Well, he seems to be so firm in this belief throughout the movie that he's better than all these people, and he's kind of looking down at them, and he's like, oh, I know the secret tricks and all this stuff that he ends up playing himself over and over again. Whether it's trusting the psychiatrist, which I think is pretty hilarious, that they're kind of saying, well, is psychoanalytic like
the better con
and you know than being a mentalist, which I think is panned out that it is, but it is kind of a hilarious thought, because there still are a lot of like, you know, a lot of like older people that they hear about psychiatry and they're like, oh, that's just another con, like that's just, you know, we're just gonna go pour it. So it's like it is that's like that thought kind of embodied in this character who at first you see
I was just gonna say, but like look at like how he uses psychological tactics, like when he like hustles the cop, basically giving him like all of like the church going rhetoric that he learned like in the orphanage, right? Like things like that. Like that's all part of the con. So he just assumes that like the woman he meets like, oh well, this is like a different kind of con, and it's sort of like for him it's a game respect game kind of thing at first.
Yeah. And he can't believe someone's going to be a better con artist. Certainly it's true with her, but even his face when Pete cons him. He does the whole thing about a boy and his dog, and he's like, his name is Jip, and he's like, every boy has a dog, which of course isn't really true. If you met a city boy who never ran barefoot in the hills, you'd be in bad shape. But clearly, the kind of carnival it is, it's rural. It's kind of like the guy who describing the Geek Show. It's out farther out. It's third-rate carny stuff. You could count on your audience being probably pretty small town and rural and all that. But the look on Stan's face for a moment, when he first he becomes a sucker, is like, that's the worst thing that can happen to you. Yeah.
There's a really kind of honestly beautiful for the time, I think. But also extremely depressing part of the book where they go into the deep South. And Stan is clearly incredibly uncomfortable with the racial segregation going on in the deep South. And there's like this vivid kind of description that he has of that's when the noir dream comes in, like the Nightmare Alley dream, where he's talking about how, racism for them and, like white people kind of chasing them, like black people in the South, like the deep South, like the most, backwards part, I guess, in his mind of the South. That kind of racial segregation for them is the same thing for him as that alley dream where people are chasing him. And he realizes that fear is something inherent in everybody. And like, so there's a moment where they really like touch on segregation and use that carny mentality before talking about how, they're just kind of playing black and white, everybody, like, the same, and like taking their money because they're all rubes. Like before that part of it, he's kind of connecting his own fear about things to segregation. And like, there's like a kind of profound passage about that. And then also there's a profound passage about how he realizes that like what he considers carny dialect is actually like a mix of all of these, like carnies having to adapt to everywhere they go, whether it's the South or, the Midwest or really anywhere, and like having to actually co-opt that language so that people trust them more.
They call it mirroring, right? Linguistical mirroring.
So he realizes that like the dialect that he's hearing is actually something far more intelligent and like sophisticated in some ways than like a regular dialect, because it actually is a mix of all of these different things that they picked up in order to like better like
appeal
train
everywhere.
So it's a fascinating book.
And he's like, I really should write about him for Jacobin. I mean, he's a communist. He fought the Spanish Civil War. His wife, before she went
on the correct. You always have to look. You always have to double check. The royalist side, or like
which side?
I know which side. The loyalist side. Yeah. I know. Let's make sure.
Against Franco, and it's like, all right, the correct side.
When a German friend says their great grandparents were in the war, it's like, oh, they were.
Check. yeah.
On the ally side. Oh, okay, all right.
And you just have to wonder if it's part of his torment. Like, they don't really list that as one of the things beyond insomnia and alcoholism and everything else. But he's a suffering communist going through, the early to mid 20th century. It's not so hot. Yeah. What goes down?
I think that. I mean, really profoundly, this book, or the book and the movies, tackle exploitation in a way that's incredibly hard for, like, show business. I think in general is somewhere where you can see the most naked, no pun intended, form of exploitation, because there's obviously studio executives pressuring women to be in movies and take more and more clothes off, and there's there's all of these different ways, like. Pornographic or like, sexually explicit video happening at that time, or shows on stage, vaudeville, like all of these things are kind of the most easy to understand forms of exploitation. But even for that, I feel like this movie was incredibly complex with the layers of exploitation that it really included within it, as like a real villainous issue throughout this movie.
It's not being like objectively moralistic about it either, or just like presenting, which is interesting because again, this is a code film, right? So they're walking a fine line where they're already taking like like the Captain America of his day, and like making him be this real disreputable grifter. And then by the same token, like they're got all this other stuff. There's like obviously there's spiritualistic elements to it. You know, like there's all kinds of other things that they're just trying to get over with this at a time that like that just really wasn't happening. I mean, it's not like it's, you know, Haxon or anything along those lines. But,
Right.
You know, it's pretty edgy stuff for its time. So to like have all that be put together in a package like this, I think that's pretty wild to me.
I love him, the scene of him conning the completely obviously corrupt cop. You know, the bully cop. That's just a gorgeous bit. And there's the weirdest moment. I don't know if you guys noticed it. I've watched it too many times maybe. But there's a scene early on where he's buttoning himself into a policeman's uniform. He's even got a badge on. And they never follow it up.
Yeah,
it's clearly
Average Tuesday, you know.
It's clearly related, you know, to some act he does or something he does. I even wonder if they somehow had a fake cop hanging around for some reason because it looked more respectful, but it's not there. It's just Tyrone Power buttoning himself into a cop uniform while he talks to Xena or something.
Yeah, just like an incidental thing. And
yeah,
by the way, Robert Mitchum, Night of the Hunter, probably one of my favorite movie villains of all time.
Yeah, me too.
maybe he's like he was an early stripper, like, you know what I mean?
It's totally random. You have no idea.
Hot cop.
But let's talk about the very unusual thing. You know, we're talking a little before the show started about how the femme fatale figure is handled and the women are handled and the way his character is the one who's using sexuality more than anyone in the film, which is very unusual, making him a kind of femme fatale, if you will.
Yeah, no, it turns that on its head. It definitely turns that on its head. He's kind of the sexually dangerous one. And then the woman who kind of uses sexuality the least, although she does obviously proposition him in the masculine role in that sense, is a psychiatrist. But it also doesn't seem like she's using her sexuality as part of her psychiatry. It does seem like she's kind of trying to seduce him, getting close to him the same way that he would be trying to seduce her, getting close to her. It's like that, you know, the spy versus spy type thing. But it never quite hits a level where it feels like she's treated as like a sexual character.
Right. It's weird. They've got her all buttoned up into what would have then been read as mannish suits. They don't look like now to us, but then it would have. It's weird. It's very unusual.
Did the book go into detail what was on the records? Did the book go into that? Because maybe she did use sexuality.
Oh, in the book, she definitely 100% does. She completely seduces him and enslaves him sexually. Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't get to that part. I got to the
and it's on record.
Part of the him.
I read it so many years ago I can hardly remember, but I can still remember his sexual obsession. There's a really daring just piece of prose where there's no end to a sentence that goes on for pages because he's in such thrall that he just is obsessing on her for pages.
I can't use any punctuation. I can't.
Yes, punctuation goes away.
It's like Hubert Selby Jr. or something, right?
But it's really effective for just conveying. He's like mesmerized by her sexually, and they just all but remove it from the movie, which is not at all necessary.
You would almost expect that
in
a film like this,
in
right?
almost every other film noir that's famous. There's a total all-out sexualized using her sexual wiles femme fatale, and here they restrain all that and make Xena the one. There's the opening shot of Stan. We see from Xena's point of view staring at him.
As you have your noir bingo card, it's like totally unfulfilled with that.
Absolutely.
The other movie that I feel like kind of I guess I don't want to say demasculizes or something, but kind of treats a man kind of like the femme fatale in a lot of ways is Double Indemnity. I feel like is the only other one I can really think of that.
But beating out Barbara Stanwyck as Phyllis Dietrichson? You mean you think the Fred McMurray guy is?
Well, no, but like in some way, like he's the one that's kind of going along, kind of enthralled by people and trying to use that. To like, he's the one that comes up with like a lot of the
right
things.
He's the salesman, always pitching and selling. So
it seems like that's kind of like vibes from early form of what they ended up doing in this movie. From something like that, where he kind of puts himself in a lot of these weird situations where he like it's almost like pornographic situations where he shows up at the house and he's like, "Oh, I'm here to sell you something." But I mean, that movie still, he was, you know, they were the femme, like we were led to believe later on that she was the femme fatale, kind of leading him into further and further.
Right.
This movie seems like it doesn't stop at that point and then reverse the roles. It just continuously treats him like the femme fatale.
Right. Right. I can give you a couple of recommendations if you're into the homme fatale. There's a couple of movies. One's called Raw Deal. It actually has a woman doing the voiceover narration about her obsession with the man. And then there's one called They Won't Believe Me.
Not the one with Schwarzenegger.
No, not that one.
Okay.
It's got, I can't even remember.
God damn it.
And then
Andy, what did you think about the line? Wait, send me those. But what did you think about the line where I instantly thought of you, where the psychiatrist sitting there and she's like, we call that total recall.
Yeah.
I was just it gave me flashbacks to college when I was playing Arnold Schwarzenegger in a play and forgot my line and said I didn't have any total recall.
Famous play character.
Play, okay.
Yes, I played strength in Everyman, so you know.
Oh, okay, got it.
I also just want to say, you know, since we're talking about other noirs, like I'm so into noir, I'm actually drinking a Pinot Noir. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow!
I'm fancy like that. But Eileen, how do you feel as like I guess this is technically a neo-noir because it's not like strict film noir. I don't know all the subgenres or categories. I just like the films. But like this versus like In a Lonely Place or something. Where
this isn't neo-noir.
No, neo's for later noir post the initial phase.
Okay.
So that's usually starting in the late 60s on. Sort of depends on where people want to place.
I mean, clearly it's carny noir, and
it's certainly carny noir.
Well, the first technical neo noir is Breathless, I think, because it's the first post-code. I think it's the first post-code noir.
Well, Point Blank, is that maybe that is later? When the one with Lee Marvin.
Because I think Breathless was 1960, so it's just as the code
you're right.
ends.
It's way earlier. Yeah.
Okay. So it's just as the code ends. And noir kind of takes off in France as like a method of creating like you know what I mean, like film, because they like a lot of French critics were like big fans of the early noir movies and they wrote about it incessantly. But like when that kind of takes off, I mean maybe this class is wrong about it, but
no, it's a good theory.
We had like a neo noir 2 sessions and reading like that book by Eddie Muller, who was who kind of is the guy from Turner Classic Movies, who did the entire like noir show where he like would bring them back. So he considers, I think, that the cutoff point because because Psycho kind of killed the last of the Hays Code, and since it was 1960, it was kind of the same time period.
Well, not the last of. I mean, the Hays Code is only officially 86, and it's like roughly 66, 67 when they replace it. But it's certainly getting weaker and weaker and weaker.
Yeah.
I mean that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So 2 things. First of all, I love Breathless. The idea of it being remotely close to a noir never even crossed my mind, but in retrospect makes sense. I just like the movie.
Yeah. Well, it's dedicated to Monogram Studios. It's there's various clues that
I get it. But like it's that thought never caught my attention. But when I think of this as somewhat kind of a certain, so maybe it's not neo-noir, maybe there's another name for it, maybe not, but like it's clearly noirish, but it doesn't follow the exact noir tropes. And I bring up In a Lonely Place because it's the same thing. It's like he's not a detective. Humphrey Bogart's a screenwriter, right? And like they kind of like mix up some of like the tropes of some of the things while hitting like the big feels and overtones and some of the other things. And I think those are for whatever reason, those tend to be like my favorites of these kinds of movies. The ones that kind of turn it on its head a little bit. And I was wondering, Eileen, if you had any other examples of that or what your thoughts on that.
Oh, ton. I mean, the part of the problem with film noir, which is one of the boring aspects of all the film scholarship on it, is you have to spend most of the time trying to define film noir. It's the biggest, baggiest, messiest, sloppiest genre. Some people won't even admit it's a genre. You get into these ridiculous conversations. Is it a mode?
It's like fascism that way.
Yeah. So you get supposedly you get these subcategories, and there's the private detective version of noir, and then there's the ones, and there's tons of them where, and you're right, I think they seem more dangerous because there's no figure who's the figure that even in a kind of backhanded way, represents the law or order.
Yeah.
You get rid of that person and it's just can be a real free-for-all that seems more the wilder and often more fascinating and darker noir. So there's tons of those where it's just a person who either goes down the wrong side street and falls into crime and their life is ruined, like in Scarlet Street. Or it's someone who suddenly gets what he thinks is a bright idea, like in Double Indemnity. Or it can. There's so many ways you can suddenly trip and fall, and everything is destroyed. It's one of the things I love about noir.
Yeah, it's just wrong step and all hope is abandoned.
Step. And boy, you're fucked. Yeah.
What
Which,
do you
seems about right. That seems realistic.
No, but what do you think about? What do you think about? So I think like kind of the heyday of neo noir is like the 70s. I mean, the 60s are obviously when it starts, but like, a lot of neo noir movies have kind of come out in the 70s and early 80s. But like, there's this kind of systemic failure, I guess, of all of our institutions that kind of is the same thing that happens in the lead up and aftermath of World War II, where, the Great Depression has happened. It seems like people aren't really necessarily trusting that the government has their best interests. People aren't necessarily trusting that law enforcement has their best interests. People are seeing all of these institutions as fully corrupt. And noir kind of comes out of that, like especially in the 50s. And, you have McCarthyism, you have all these things, and it's kind of building up this. And I mean, you have the pulp novels before that, too, in like the 1920s, where it feels like capitalism has fully failed. And, our financial institutions have failed. Our government systems have failed. And then you have a similar kind of, with Watergate, with with the, the CIA hearings, with, all of these different things where you've realized that corruption is rampant and every system has failed is kind of a mirroring of those two things, I think. And I mean, that starts in the 60s too, with LBJ kind of being the first president that everyone's kind of like, oh no, this guy's fucking lying to us. He's lied us into a war. So these mirroring of these two moments where things have kind of fallen apart brings back these movies based on pulp novels, pretty much, that are about systemic failure. I don't know. I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
Oh, I completely agree. It's it's a cult, and it can be confusing for some because like the 50s, which if you just take a kind of pop history view of the 50s, isn't that the stable, prosperous era? Everyone gets to be in the middle class and blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, the answer is no. The 50s still has this huge hangover. And the World War II being a good war where everyone comes out all jolly also, part of pop history that's a bunch of bullshit. So, yeah, this collapse that is almost an ongoing or a constantly recurring collapse with, interludes of where noir doesn't seem as relevant and then it comes back, definitely. But what I like about the whole, now you can't rely on anything. You can't rely, the cops, everyday people are crooked, the cops are crooked, the systems of government are crooked, everything's crooked. And you literally have film noir that are about that. Like there's nowhere to go that isn't hopelessly fallen. But we go even further in certain film noir, and I think Nightmare Alley is one of them, where there's a creepy edge of horror suggestion that there's something cosmically wrong. It goes beyond humanity.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that, but yeah, 100%.
So there's a strain. Sometimes it's called horror noir or gothic noir. There's all sorts of different names, and then they dredge up all the ones that have something so doomy that it seems to go beyond the ordinary experience of human. It goes into some sort of supernatural or occult or cosmic realm, and it's still bad. It's still like a dark god. If there's a god, and he hates us. It's that kind of thing. And that's where I really like. That's one of my favorite places to be in noir, is where there's a brooding sense, and you'll have scenes dedicated to it, or even plots. If you see a one called Night Has a Thousand Eyes, it takes again the character of the phony psychic, the phony spiritualist act. And it has Edward G. Robinson, and he, literally in the middle of his phony mentalist or psychic act, he becomes really psychic. But the only thing he can see is how everyone he's dealing with is going to die. So it's beautifully morbid film noir that rides exactly that line that it seems like less insistently Nightmare Alley does, where Zena's cards keep being sort of uncomfortably close to something true, and the suggestion that there's something dark and brooding and horrible that has an edge of the supernatural that they don't make much of. They just sort of let it lie there as an uneasy making aspect of such a bleak worldview. So that's among my favorite things.
So, and there was something in the comments specifically about Sin City. I actually was going to bring up both Frank Miller and James Ellroy, and the fact that both of those dudes, I think, are great writers that I would not want to hang out with, let alone talk politics with. But I mean, not exactly humanists or progressives necessarily.
Right.
But that said, I mean, I think
Frank Miller's mellowed, so I'll give him credit for that. But
yeah.
You know,
well, you have
mellowed from
what?
from almost fascist.
From because 9/11.
Well, you have a similar dynamic.
He did a reverse Mammoth. Go ahead.
Between like Frank Miller and like Mickey Spillane, right? Like in some ways, I mean, just this incredibly, I mean, who really was the king for a while of, and I don't just say that because he lived in Newburgh 20 minutes from me, but for a lot of his life. But Mickey Spillane kind of was the reactionary king of pulp novels for a really fucking long time. And we started this, this podcast with Kiss Me Deadly, which is, I mean, as a movie that Mickey Spillane fucking hated. But Mickey Spillane despised Kiss Me Deadly, but like was the movie that I wanted to start this this podcast with, because I think there's been a lot of leftist cinema that's come out in the last few years that's been really amazing. But like, to give credit where it's due with Kiss Me Deadly, like to really have like the nuclear bomb, like or the atom bomb in the center of this of this box.
Great, what's
really,
it? I love it.
Yeah, and to really have that as almost like a red herring throughout a lot of the movie, because they're really just trying to figure out what the fuck it is. It's kind of amazing to me. And episode 1 of this podcast ended up, we didn't really quite know formatting at this point, so it ended up being a 3-hour conversation.
Oh my god!
but we've gotten, I think, a little bit better now with stuff. But But that is like what we started with, and that kind of is like a I think for me a pinnacle of noir, like this satirical, because I think that movie kind of led to Dr. Strangelove and really amazing cinema like that. And so I think that there's a lot of different ways that like this pulp novelization can be taken, but it is quite amazing to me that so much of it is based on pulp novels, which kind of veer in a lot of different directions. And then we talk about how noir veers in a lot of different directions for the same reason, because pulp novels can be like this kind of almost like comical look at like horror characters before horror movies were really something that people focused on, or they can be a private detective kind of going around and solving crimes, or a full system failure. And it really has no boundaries to what these novels can be, and they can be incredibly sexually explicit, because you're just kind of buying them and people are just kind of reading them like, oh, well, this is 10 cents. I'll buy it for that reason. And kind of reading it like you would like 50 Shades of Grey or something. So the fact that it can veer in so many different directions it really, really interests me in terms of what noir ends up kind of being as a genre.
And there's just something so, I don't know. There's something inherently thrilling about marrying the tawdry and when you could say realistic with something of a huge scale in its implications, in its shall we say dark philosophy. To get those two things together seems kind of mind exploding in a way, as opposed to kind of knowing when you go into, I don't know, it's an important art film and it's going to have a philosophical take, and then you're all prepped for it, and it seems like you get what was advertised. With film noir, you're mostly thinking tawdry. Usually B movie, usually low down and sexy and all that other stuff. And then to get these kind of scenes of kind of pulp philosophy and pulp, even religiosity and cosmic thinking is what
now
you're
just sound like you're describing Roadhouse, but
which is also great.
Roadhouse Part 3. Here we go.
Yeah. So this is my personal weakness. I like it when it's bringing things that are together that seem really confounding and not what you're expecting. And if you don't have knee-jerk snob contempt for it, you're going to get a fabulously rich experience that you might not get any other way.
Yeah, I think there's a real like proletariat ennui kind of beauty to a lot to these films.
Absolutely.
Right?
How gorgeous. I mean, film noir is just this challenge to anyone with gifted visually and especially. So even at the Z level budget, you know, you've got people who are trying to bust up to C and B level. So they're killing themselves doing cinematography that is sensational.
Yeah.
And, you know, this movie, I have to say, is a little quieter than a lot of the flashier noir. I'm sure if you're thinking, if you just dealt with Kiss Me Deadly, you perhaps thought the same. There's certainly flashier film noir, but this one has a kind of insidious quality that I like. It's quieter. You have to watch it a couple of times to realize, you know, even though it's not being as showy as, say, a Fritz Lang film or something, it's got a ton of entrapping, you know, production design that you have to kind of, you don't see at first. There's shadow play that isn't as dramatic as the signature look of a lot of noir. But
one amazing example is Naked City, right? Like they literally had like Ouija doing the like doing some of the really amazing cinematography that just didn't really need to happen. And kind of just kind of trying to get like this movie with the, you know, with like a B movie plot into like a full thing that, you know, there's 6 million people in the city, and here's the story of just a couple, like, you know what I mean? Like it didn't really need to get to that level, but it does seem like it's almost like art photography masquerading as noir film in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. You see it in so many cases.
I do want to shout out, just since we're talking about good cinematography, Border Incident, which I think is
John Alton, right? Fabulous.
I don't remember.
I think that's him. Yeah.
I just know Ricardo Montalban's in it.
Yes.
And the guy from All My Children was playing a Mexican.
Okay. Probably.
Palmer,
yes, I don't remember.
Palmer Chandler, I think. I can't remember the character's name from All My Children. My mom used to watch it, my grandmother. So, like, you know, I grew up, you know how it is. Like you know, I was in an All My Children house.
Is it worse or better than Charlton Heston playing a Mexican?
No, it's Ricardo Montalban
Ricardo Montalban plays the cop, and then his best friend is a white guy.
He's a white dude
playing a Mexican.
Okay, is that what it is?
Like,
all right, I forgot.
Because Touch of Evil is considered like the prestige level of noir that will ever exist, and it's Charlton Heston playing a Mexican.
And it's,
that opening single shot is just beautiful.
Right.
As referencing The Player, which we did for the Movie Night Extravaganza, This Is Revolution crossover, which that was a fun episode.
Yeah, that was a really fun episode. All right, and like Dean Stockwell, our friend, our ally,
our comrade.
To
be honest, he was like, you know,
he was talking about ozone depletion back when, you know, like people were not
getting made fun of by Dennis Miller, which I really wish Sam Cedar had just come in and just.
Oh damn! I didn't know that.
It's a pretty amazing clip, actually.
Wow.
What episode was that on? Was that Paris, Texas?
Yeah, that was Paris, Texas.
Okay.
Wow, you covered the waterfront.
Dean Stockwell rock.
Yeah, exactly. Before we go too far away from this, we're talking about cinematography. I just want to give a shout out to the man, Roger Deakins. And I was thinking to myself, like, has he ever done a noir? Because that's someone that, like, I mean, 1917.
Well, he's done a lot of Coen Brothers.
Because he does so many Coen Brothers films. So he starts with Barton Fink, right?
So,
which is my favorite Coen Brothers film, by the way.
Oh.
And there's also Prisoners by Denis Villeneuve, who's also just a Dune. And I think, like, in a way, like No Country for Old Men absolutely is noir, right? Like, if you think about it from terms of, like, even just the source material and like, just, you know, what are you saying?
Which is a movie that kind of is referenced hard by Dune. If you think about, you know, like,
by nature of Brolin and
and Oscar Isaac,
where there's
go ahead.
No, there's still kind of enemies in
Javier Bardem.
Dune. There's still enemies in Dune. Where, by the way, I watched Dune the first time my mom came with me to the theater, and it was like we had like this really funny conversation where I was like, "That's Javier Bardem," and I was like, "Remember No Country for Old Men?" And she's like, "No, what are you talking about?" And I showed her that scene, and she was like, "Oh." Yeah,
because they look like they. It's funny because they're kind of.
He was asking everybody like how much they ever lost in the coin toss. It was pretty obvious. But
yeah, it's almost like they're giving each other like the Simpsons baby side eye,
right?
As like an in joke or something, right? But no, what I was gonna say is, of course, like I wasn't gonna mention the Coen Brothers because I was gonna leave that for other folks to do. Because of course, there's Coen Brothers usage, but.
Favorite genre, pretty much.
Of course, yeah, shocking, right?
Yeah.
But Prisoners, which again, I'm a big Dennis fan. That like, I think Prisoners is absolutely a modern noir, and it doesn't. But the thing is, it doesn't look like a modern noir. Like it's lit completely differently. But if you think about it in terms of like what it is, like the sort of like just dark ruination of the human soul sort of element, like, and the fact that like, spoiler alert, it doesn't end nicely for anyone either too. Like I think it totally fits in the genre. So I was thinking about in terms of like, oh, has he ever done, Roger Deakins? I wonder if he's, and it's like, oh, he's done like tons of them because he's the master of lighting. He made that 1917 movie worth watching. That was just that kid running around for 3 hours getting shot at.
I know.
But it's beautiful. It looks awesome.
Or Skyfall. God, Skyfall was gorgeous. That was all Deakins. Yeah.
Anyway, that's a shout at Roger Deakins. Come on the show.
Yes. Yes.
And can we get a little love for Bill Pope too? Just saying.
Yeah,
absolutely. Hell yeah.
Because he actually did do some. The Crow, if I remember correctly, was his, and so was Dark City, which are definitely filmed like noirs. You could argue that they're noirs, and I'll fight that fight, but definitely visually borrowed heavily from film noir.
Well, it's almost like the comics were clearly inspired by noir, and then the movies like are referencing the comics, so it's almost
which makes it an interesting circle, right? Because I feel like along with pulp novels, like comics were some of the first noir,
works.
hinged, like works of literature. So like to have it kind of continuously be this circle that goes into itself is interesting to me.
Detective Comics, Batman. I mean,
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and it helps if you think of film. I mean, it's hard to define film noir. It really is, because again, it's got so much sources and so much sourcing and so much circular relationship to other forms, and I don't know, it's spread over so much time by now with noir. If you take noir and neo-noir, that trying to think of what is it about. Like, what is noir about? It seems like, at least in America, it seems very pertinent to, even though other countries do noir, of course, it seems very pertinent to a vision of America that the Coens have picked up. They've added a lot more humor, but it's fundamentally, it seems like a vision of a failed society, even a doomed one, that from the beginning there was something crazy and off and wrong about it, and we're just living it out. In a horrifying fashion, and
we're living it out. I mean, we're living it out now, and we can kind of put it on paper or in film now, which isn't something that you could necessarily do with the Hays Code. So it's interesting that you look at I think it's kind of the first phase of noir is the fully inspired by pulp novels. Like the private detective ones that Humphrey Bogart did so well. That's kind of like the first phase you can probably pick up of noir films. And it's interesting that the whole point of those, as like having a private detective as the or a private investigator, or or a Seamus, as they call him, as like the main character or the hero, is somebody that's far enough away from the police force that they can solve mysteries or solve crimes without actually getting law enforcement or the government involved, which kind of speaks to the fully, because I remember I talked to Catherine Liu on one of the first episodes that we had, and we talked about we watched a couple movies that had come out pretty recently, Wrath of Silence, and I'm trying to remember what the other one was. No, well, we watched Taken, but that was on a different that was for a different part of the conversation. We watched Wrath of Silence, and we watched we watched like Chinese films that kind of showed that the government and the bureaucracy had kind of failed, but they obviously can't say it. And I feel the same way about noir films, because like the early ones in the 40s, because you can't say that the government's failed. You kind of hint that, you know, either a citizen has to take something into their own hands, and a lot of times that citizen ends up becoming a private investigator that once worked with the police or worked with law enforcement, but now has kind of had to take it into their own hands because the police force wasn't necessarily corrupt. Like, you're not going to say, hey, these are corrupt people that we can't trust, but you can say these are, you know, people that aren't necessarily doing their jobs the right way, and here's a private citizen to do it in a way that's, you know, a private citizen that's also a former cop to do it in a way that's, you know, a little bit better than what the police force are doing. And you look at you look at a lot of Chinese cinema, and they kind of have to do it the same way.
Right. You have to hint around.
Yeah.
And you also have to hint around even more at someone like Dashiell Hammett, for all that people who loved his Sam Spade loved, in fact, ironically loved the machismo, but often with Hammett, and then with you know, Chandler, who admits he borrows a ton from Hammett. You got to put this lead figure, who's an anti-hero figure, into solving something that winds up being annihilating in some way. It's got to be some huge threat to his sense of himself as having any kind of masculine control. So that often gets softened in the movies. If you read The Maltese Falcon, which is, you know, one of the first to really set the terms for the whole thing, he goes back to his office in the end after having sent over, as they, you know, in other words, handed over the woman he maybe loves. He will never quite admit to it if he does. And he goes back and sits in that little isolated office, which has formerly been the site of how he controls. He looks out over the city. He's in his weird tawdry way a kind of king of the city. He can maneuver better than anyone in this labyrinth. But suddenly his trusted, you know, Girl Friday, his we'd now call her what, an assistant, is now withdraws from him in horror that he's done this thing. He's sort of demonstrated he has no heart, he has no soul. All he cares about is preserving a kind of masculine control. And it's also got to be he's solving something that's so ridiculously convoluted and takes him into absolutely every enclave in the city. So he's got to examine the whole society on his way. And it just gets darker and more vertiginous, so that it's supposed to be devastating by the end. It's supposed to be have a kind of annihilating quality that's new, that's really new. And usually, again, it gets a little softened. You know, we've got Bogart walking away saying it's the stuff that dreams are made of over the Maltese Falcon and stuff, which is a very romantic way of handling. They don't take him back to the office for the devastating finale of, well, congratulations, here's your office where you'll be alone forever. You know, the Coens take on Hammett when they do Miller's Crossing. They don't give him any credit. They totally steal everything from Hammett. But it's the same kind of referendum on masculine control and power in a world where it's all illusory. So there's poor, you know, Gabriel Byrne getting beaten up and kicked all over the map and losing everything. By the end, he loses everything, and you're not even sure if it was the woman he loved. It's much more likely it was Leo. But the whole thing is about, by the end, he has nothing. You don't know where he's going to go. You don't know what he's going to do. And there's a sense of total loss and devastation. So they really get Hammett beyond what I think a lot of fans who love Hammett and love Chandler and love the pulps and love the tough guy who seems to be at the center aren't trying to reckon with that aspect of it, of pure devastation, of total loss of meaning, of the incomprehensibility of society.
How much of that is the Hollywood version of it too, that, you know, can't show that, and like even, right, you know, exactly, even in an implied situation can't really show that. And, you know, any turn towards homosexuality, which does exist in Maltese Falcon, has to be villainy. You know what I mean? Like the homosexuality in it has to be, look, this is a villainous act. Dudes are sleeping together. And it's like, is that really the height of their villainy? Because that doesn't seem too villainous to me. That just seems like, you know, dudes hanging out. But
well, I got two things if I can, because I know we're going to move on to something else. But one thing with that is that I like the idea of the detective. Why is it always detectives? It's always detectives. I think the idea that, like, well, it's a law enforcement adjacent, but not beholden to the rules of culture, right? Like, they exist.
It's private law enforcement. Like it kind of is an early form of the neoliberal turn. Like they fulfill the function that the government like services would, but they happen to be private citizens. You know what I mean? Like,
but that's a motivating factor as well, because every detective's also, you know, it's always like, oh, we're just, you know, we need another case. I got to close the doors. Like, there's always like these mundane little challenges that happen with
money's at stake. He actually has to make a living. He's got a crap office. He usually has a room behind it where he lives. It's very important that his life be crappy in that way.
And there's always this moral quandary of like, you know, wanting to do good, but also wanting to keep the lights on. And that's something that's like, it's become so ingrained in our society that like it's something that we just naturally associate with it. But it's interesting to think of like where that came from, right? Because like if you think about stories like with you know, these archetypical type characters, like, you know, cowboys, like New Sheriff and so on and so on, right? I think the noir detective is like a clear example of one that's like, wow, this person maybe is kind of like in a tough spot, kind of a loser. Like, it's like it's one of the first American archetypes that is coming not from a place of victory, but coming from a place of like being downtrodden usually. And that's really interesting to me, because I think a lot of people focus on that is noir inherently misogynistic, maybe et cetera, and like lots of other aspects of why does it have to be someone outside the law. Okay, I think we all know that if we have a modicum of critical thinking, but the idea that like it is someone that's just one case away from being on the skids themselves, you know, like that. I think that's really interesting, and I can't think of a modern archetype or, you know, semi-modern archetype that is closer to that. So I'm curious, Eileen, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'd say two things. In only a couple of aspects, like the Western quote unquote hero who has a foot in lawfulness, often is literally becomes the sheriff or is the sheriff, but a foot in lawlessness. The Western hero is almost always someone who's what, at least in a kind of classic mode, is always perfectly at home in wilderness, but has to wind up fighting for the civilization he doesn't want to be part of. And then if you really go classic Western, he always had to leave because he can't live with the people. He can try to save them for lawfulness, but that means he has to leave. So there's that kind of, and he never has any money, but the difference is he never needs any.
That's the thing, is right.
There's a suggestion of he's complete and full.
Like, it's a tacit, like, no, he's happy, just ran around on his horse.
There's no implication of loserdom. It's like Ronin in Seven Samurai or closer. Yeah. That's another archetype you could use. Which is a figure of like, you've lost everything, you're barely eating, and then you have to take on a heroic job and save the farmers or whatever.
Right. Yeah, but then you have your honor to keep her warm, right?
Right. Okay. It's also got huge differences. But I mean, there's a couple of interesting ways you can talk about, like, yes, why do we wind up? It's because clearly there was a desire to have someone who could be outside of potentially corrupting institutional authority centers, act as a private individual, seem to have a ton of power that way. And the way you keep that power is you stay out of a desperate desire to make money and acquire status. That's the way you preserve masculine autonomy, is you don't become a wage slave. You don't have to bow, you don't have to call anyone boss. You're your own boss. You do your
Eugene
own
Debs would have been proud.
Yeah. But again, I think that's why it's a kind of shocking thing to realize the extent to which Hammett and to a lesser extent Chandler and others were willing to kind of undercut that very ground, that kind of shabby but still perhaps admirable ground that the private eye anti-hero stands on, or at least make it tremble a little bit.
Like with the hope of justice, if maybe not its promise.
Or the hope of something coming out the way it should, even. Yeah. I mean,
maybe the scales being like 1/10 or moved this way rather than that way, right?
Right. Certainly more with Chandler. Chandler expressly aligns himself with knighthood, right? You know,
I think a format which is not a movie but is a TV show that kind of takes on the full extent of that private detective mentality and fully is able to realize it is The Wire. You know, with McNulty having no morality at all besides let me solve a case. And, you know, I don't like the last season of The Wire necessarily where he fakes the serial killer, but there is a neoliberal aspect of that entire show where budgets are getting cut more and more. You have to show results. You have to show statistics. People are faking statistics in order. But that is neoliberalism inherent, right? Like it's the fact that, you know, everything is stat based now. And if you want to actually have any money to fight crime, which is a very real thing in an inner city, but if you want to even have close to the funding to fight crime, there has to be like a statistical like model for how you're fighting crime, and which is not something that inherently goes together anyway. So somebody's suddenly juking the stats, and then to get elected as a politician, you have to kind of, you know, say, hey, we fought crime this much, here's a percentage, which is not something that necessarily goes with how crime works. So it's like this neoliberal element to it. And the fact that McNulty in The Wire, which I'm not necessarily saying is neo-noir, but it definitely is, kind of takes elements from it for McNulty's character, in terms of like, there is no good or evil. It's just whether or not you solve a crime. And that's kind of like the full extent of a private detective model, or like archetype. It's just like, listen, I'm here to fight crime. And if I, you know, if I manage to solve this case, I'm going to be really happy. If I don't solve this case, I'm not. What if the case, you know, is kind of framing somebody? I don't know. I don't care. That's not my business. I'm just here to, you know, pull out stats. Like, stats are my goal. Being able to say I solved a crime is my goal. That's really all. And it feels like kind of building up on that private detective model kind of hits that point where it's like, well, why do private detectives kind of, they're not doing well. A lot of times they seem like they're alcoholics. They have a full foot in like the criminal element. Why do they keep doing this? And kind of the perfect answer to that question in The Wire is like, they just have a pathological need to solve crimes. You know what I mean? Like in that case, like they just have a pathological need to like hit that point. So it's like, all right,
the game.
Like, if that's what you get off on, like, sure, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
though it seems like you've completely sacrificed one motivating factor, which is you get out somehow, can tell yourself you're outside the system and acting on your own. That seems to be jettisoned.
There's almost like a libertarian kind of aspect to film noir, like you know, you're this
a very clear one if you're Mickey Spillane, because that's kind of his whole thing.
But they're also all betas, just like real libertarians, so you know it all works out.
Yeah,
you guys can probably hear my dog barking in the background, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Well, and since we're bringing up just, you know, television shows we like with noirish influences, I want to mention that rewatching. So the House of Neutron is currently rewatching Star Trek: The Next Generation right now. Brilliant show. Was an automated future space communism. Is that what the saying? But I love the idea.
You didn't leave in gay, which is good because that show was anti-gay. I love Star Trek,
really?
But yeah, Star Trek: Next Generation.
Okay, we're not talking about that. That's okay.
That's a whole podcast.
Utterly irrelevant to my point, because the point is that like, you have Jean-Luc Picard, who's, you know, considered this archetypical like captain of the starship and like leader amongst men, et cetera, et cetera. But what's one of his heroes? This character Dixon Hill, who's a private investigator, like
Dixon Hill, wow.
Which is very clearly based on these kinds of like books and movies. And like they do these holodecks like for comedy, but they do the holodecks where it's all just like every noir cliche that you can think of. You know, some hardboiled character comes in, like, you know. Everyone's on the take, on the make, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's so interesting to think about the idea that, you know, hundreds of years in the future, that like there would still be like this fetishistic sort of like, oh, wow, this is, you know, noir is cool. Like he's awesome. He like does good in his own way. And like that even if not necessarily with the same trappings of civilization that we have that surrounded the stories in that time, but could pass forward into the future is very interesting to me. That like, you know, basically, I think noir can have legs in that way, because it's almost like go back to like caveman tales or something, right? Like there's like your classic tales of good and evil, but then there's like, you know, what about the in between? What about that? You know, nothing good ever happened to me. Nothing bad is going to happen to me out tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly just Blade Runner on. There's a very friendly crossover. Noir is so weird because there's a friendly crossover point with so many genres in the most unlikely ways. But yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I guess that's a long way to say we've been watching Star Trek recently.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like you've been watching Star Trek. But yeah, they're evoking it. Dixon
Forrest
Hill
get to geek out about The Wire for like 10 minutes.
I'm everybody's dad that just discovered The Wire.
Yeah,
no, I'm watching
The Wire.
I've been watching The Wire for years.
It's so great. I mean, it's a great show.
Like, yeah.
But I have to go. I'm gonna go check on my dog in a second.
Okay.
But I wanna cue up this clip.
Mm-hmm.
So Nightmare Alley, which apparently is where we started this conversation at. The only real clips I could find discussing the filming of it were Colleen Gay, who played Molly, who lived until I think she passed away in 2015, talking about her experience filming, and I pulled a couple clips from that. And so this is her talking about Tyrone Power and the way that he and I know this is a it's a really fast way to pull us back into the conversation on the movie, but I wanted to play this. This is her talking about Tyrone Power, how he got involved in it, and how she got involved in it, and I think this is an interesting clip. While I make sure that my dog is doing okay with my family.
So when I found that I was to work with Tyrone Power, I was about ready to faint. Of course, the most handsome man that has ever been in film, I think. And he had a charming personality, that Irish kind of, and he had the acting ability to go with it. But because he was so very handsome, they put him in costume pictures. All sorts of blood and sand, things that were full of spectacle, swashbucklers, etc., full of fights and whatever, but not much substance.
You're wonderful, Stan.
Honest?
Just wonderful.
What are you shaking for?
I don't know. I'm not scared anymore. I don't know what it is. But I'll be all right in a minute.
Sure. Nothing's going to hurt you as long as Stan's around.
I know it. You're terrific.
It's a marvelous story, and Tyrone Power read the book Nightmare Alley by William Lindsay Gresham. And he saw in this movie the vehicle to escape from the pretty boy image that he had at 20th Century Fox. And he's a fine actor, a man of a great personal dimension. And so he wanted to do it, and Daryl Zanuck didn't want him to. Now, I became acquainted with this when my first husband, Rod Amato, who worked at Fox, brought this book home and gave it to me. He says, read this book. So I did. I read it with great fascination, and I knew I was born to play Molly. I just knew it was a wonderful, wonderful character. So I went to see Daryl Zanuck, and we had a nice chat, and I told him I was born to play Molly. And he was very nice. He said, well, if we get a big name for the Geek, we can probably float some unknowns, an unknown for Molly. But if we get a medium-sized star, then we have to go for 3 top names for the women. You understand that? I said, yes, I understand that. And however, I was allowed to test with the gentlemen who were trying out for the Geek part. I could test in the part of Molly, which I did. And it was the test material from these Nightmare Alley tests that Henry Hathaway saw and wanted me for Kiss of Death. So the tapestry of life at 20th Century Fox was had multi-threads, many threads.
Nice.
I don't know. I thought it was interesting that they pushed for it as hard as they did.
Yeah, it's crazy. In fact, it's insane. And there is that one account about how supposedly Zanuck so didn't want Tyrone Power to be in this thing that after they spent all this money make this movie, he tried to pull it from theaters fast and not publicize it. And all it makes no sense. I don't know how true that could possibly be.
Yeah, I mean, I'll play that as the last clip.
Oh, is that there? That's covered. Okay.
But it's in her like, you know, reading of this movie. But and then we can wrap up and I'll have Conan do his I think his signature bit. But this is the last clip I'll play. It's interesting. It's she's talking about how Zanuck really kind of wanted to pull it from play very fast, and to the point where a lot of the actors involved in it thought that, like, you know, certain people involved in the movie like definitely deserved Oscars, and that they didn't even let it jump into Oscar circulation. Which is, you know, fascinating.
Crazy. Yeah.
Don't hear anything.
Because we all thought it was great. I mean, the performances, the scenes, the way it worked. We knew we had something wonderful. Somebody like Helen Walker. What a performance. The Cobra woman of all time.
Boys running barefoot through the hills. A dog is with him. A dog is with him. His name was Jip. Go on. See how easy it is to hook him?
Ian Keith, to me, should have gotten an Academy Award for that scene. But Zanuck deliberately said, don't do anything but just let this out. We'll let it go out and let it die and go away. We were all disappointed, of course. And at one time I said, oh, if I could see my name in lights at Grauman's Chinese, I'd be happy forever. So I drove and I saw my name in lights at Grauman's Chinese. And that was, I thought, well, am I supposed to be happy forever? It's nice to have your name in lights, but I'm not happy forever.
Damn.
Wow, that is very poignant. My God.
By the way, you know what won and kind of almost swept that year was Best Years of Our Lives.
Oh,
fine. You know, it's good. It's good enough.
But
like, what a safe choice.
But it's not happy forever.
Not happy forever. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
No, but she kind of goes into it fast, but it's like, you know, he kind of buried it. And then it took until I think the 70s or 80s for it really to you know, follow it. I think probably the 80s, I guess, with it kind of coming back on TV and being looked at like for the first time again, and people being like, oh shit, this is like a good movie. But so we do this segment, and then I'll go to everyone for final thoughts. Where
can I just real quick? I feel disingenuous if I didn't mention the fact that the whole grift about how they do the mind reading with the voice inflection and stuff. I found that stuff fascinating. Like outside of anything to do with noir, I was like, oh, that's so cool. Because I'm always into that, the kind of like, how is the trick done, etc. kind of thing, and be like, oh, like. She puts an inflection on a certain word in a certain way, and that means this. And I was like, oh, I thought that was cool as hell. I think that's
and they really push it, because at first you can completely believe that's how, when they're just holding up objects like a coin, and you could easily see how a code would work. But the longer they do the act,
you're like, really?
The more crazy, like, how could he possibly,
how did you get that?
Well, how could they have a code where they not only can, they can repeat the whole question? How would there be any code for that? So that's another thing I really love, because it starts to take off into a gray area of like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is there something about being such a con artist that you can read people past a point that's rational?
Yeah, like it's like magical realism of being a con artist. Yeah,
absolutely, and that happens several times.
And in the book, they kind of take it even further when he's kind of forcing her to learn the code, and there's like number 88 wants to join to a club, an association, or an organization or some organization. Wow, but it's like he's making her repeat that over and over again. She's like, oh wow, joining a club, an organization. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like. There's so many elements to the code. It's not just like, oh, well, this is the mother. This is, you know, this is something with the sister. This is something with, it's like number 88. Like they're just, you know, they're listing off all these different phrases. Like what can the phraseology for that be? Like
possibly
what you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
What do we be today? Is Instagram influencer, has a true crime podcast. Like, what would it be?
Has a lower tier podcast about film that goes into.
Yes, exactly. I mean, how is he supposed to have guessed that? When Lilith first asks her question to trip him up, he has to just common sense, as he says, guess that she's disingenuous. Yeah. It's about her mother. Her mother actually is dead. There's some wild guessing going on.
It makes that one
was a guess I could actually get, because I think that you kind of feel in the air maybe that she's reading the mom's thing, so maybe like it's challenging enough that he's like, oh no, this is someone that's trying to like trip me up. But like there's other ones where he just kind of guesses it, and it's like, how the fuck did he possibly get that one?
There's no way.
I know.
Like I don't care how many codes you memorize.
Right.
There's no way, man. Come on. But I love it. Like, and I suspend disbelief because I'm like, this kicks ass. This is really great.
He's the great Stanton.
He is the great.
He plays hotels. They're not carnivals anymore. I also like that he works his way up the like huckster ladder,
chain.
Which is like not something you think has just somebody with like a fake crystal ball, and then you're like, oh well, I guess the next one is you're working at a hotel. Oh, I guess the next one is you're like doing private spiritual readings, and you're like, oh shit, like this really does have like a ladder that you could climb, like. You could become like the Elon Musk of like scammers, and which I mean is Elon Musk, but like you could in the 1940s,
right? And it's weird because you're right, they take you step by step, and they do really insist on the difficulty of the code and everything, to the point that there's actually a little edge of respect for labor in this. Like you think they're just know nothing carnies. You got to be fucking brilliant to do this. I mean, I don't know how the hell they're doing it.
The huckster ladder.
That's
it's the Dave Rubin story.
Exactly. We're going to get it in the comments.
Right.
All right. Conan, you ready for our...
and I walked all over my signature bit. Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're trying to do it.
So, Eileen, are you on Letterboxd? Letterboxd is like, it's a site where you can do...
I'm not.
All right, so you do kind of reviews of each movie. I wasn't on it till doing the show. Oh, Andy's back for your signature bit. So there's so you go on it and you log the movies you've watched as like entries, and you can rate and
log movies you want to watch too. That's a cool feature.
Which I have not used that feature yet.
It's
I don't want to watch any more movies. I've been no, I'm kidding.
And you can make lists and like it's like a social media site, but it's based around watching film and discussing film together. So you do keyword maybe you would of interest to people that are in this show, et cetera, et cetera. Andrew's on it. Forrest is on it as the show. So if you follow Movie Extravaganza, that's Forrest.
So everyone else could hate a movie, and I could love the movie, and I could just write a great review, and everyone could be like, "Yo, fuck you."
Yeah, that's my life.
And of course, I'm on it. Matthew Film Guy's on. A bunch of people are on it. It's really
Matthew Film Guy is like the king of Letterboxd.
It's a great resource and it makes it fun in a way that something like IMDb is not. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Was that disingenuous? I think so. Anyway.
Okay. That helps. All right.
Yeah. IMDb sponsor us, and then we'll say nice
exactly. Letterboxd or IMDb. Come on, who's gonna do it? Let's go.
All right. So Conan finds ones that are one sentence, and he finds the best of the one sentence reviews.
Because I think these are the ones that like you can make long drawn out, and I do this all the time. I mean, you can make long drawn out, regular reviews that are detail laden, all the reasons why you liked it, loved it, single things, like whatever. And I do that stuff all the time. But the thing that really pops for this site is just the quick hit.
Yeah, I haven't made it onto that. I haven't made it onto these yet. So
Well, I'm not gonna put anyone from the show. Why put Matthew?
I'm kidding. All right.
There's definitely ones that would have been on if it wouldn't have been like, come on, like
whatever.
Anyway, I like the that are on this. Yeah, here's how brilliant we are. Come on.
All right. You ready?
Longest intro ever. Yeah. So here they are, Eileen. This is
okay.
I would let any one of these women ruin my life. That's Aaron.
All right.
Geek tragedy.
Geek, okay, that was nice.
That's Michael Straczynski. That's
good. That's good.
This is a movie about a guy who was so good at fucking people over that he accidentally managed to fuck himself. Also while on a circus.
God, those are all good. Now I'm really daunted. Jeez.
And then, of course, I spoiled this one. Carny Noir.
Carny Noir. Yeah, that's
Shaughnessy.
beautiful. That is beautiful. Those are great. I would be no good at this whatsoever.
And our final one.
Chekhov's Geek. Think about it.
Yes.
Think about it.
That's right.
That's Tim
beautiful
Cobb for you. Yeah.
I
love a good Chekhov's gun reference. So that's a. Oh, go ahead.
My one sentence review for this was if you've ever wondered how does a guy start biting the heads off of chickens, this is the movie for you.
Pretty much.
So you're all great at this. I'm amazed you're not all kings of Letterboxd already.
Well, I started off doing good like long ones where I was like really trying to analyze the movie, and I was like, this is not what this thing is for.
No one wants it.
Well, so I will say there is a community for people that do like that and do kind of search that out, but it's like a small part of the community. Most people are just there to like, it's like in our ADD adult society of social media, it's kind of what you think it is, but in a good way, because this is all the proletariat, right? It's just, you don't have to be like Roger Ebert. You can just log on to this site and boop, 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 and pop out some hilarious stuff and have it read on some show you've never seen.
Now I have a new ambition. I want to.
One Jacobin person that's on it is Nando Vila.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he does a lot of them.
He does them,
and I disagree with at least half of his reviews.
Oh, right. There's even a lot of disagreement among us Jacobin critics, obviously.
Dear sir.
Lots.
All right, so the last little bit of the show is final thoughts, and I'll start with you, Eileen. Final thoughts on this movie? Anything you want to add that we didn't?
I just want to throw in. I remembered again. We forgot to talk about the trailer for the new one, and it's fascinating because it really.
I'll pull it up while you're talking.
It's really amazing how boldly different. It makes sense in a way that Guillermo del Toro is going with his version of this, because whereas the one we've been talking about it goes for a kind of plainness, especially for film noir, which can get really amazingly visually over the top. It goes for a kind of tawdry. It's got a lot of realistic details. You can see the dirt on people's clothes. You can see very homely, ugly details of the world. He's going all out supernatural over the top for a guy who's claiming there are no supernatural elements. It sure looks in the preview like it's all wild, darkly woo-woo, the devil's coming for you kind of visuals. Did I not give you enough time to find it? Sorry.
Keep stalling. Keep stalling.
No, just the internet here is taking a second. But
and the casting is on the one hand seems ideal, but in other ways, just because I love the old movie, probably I'm a little more suspect. Like Bradley Cooper looks shifty. He looks like he could be a hustler in a way that Tyrone Power looks like a swashbuckler. I don't know. I'm having a hard time with looking forward to Del Toro's version, but
it seems like it's
got to keep an open mind.
Totally different kind of movie, and like
it's going to be totally
way, right? So
yeah,
I mean,
it really is. Yes,
and there are times that works, and there are times it's like more of an update. I'm thinking of like Wages of Fear versus.
For me, it has a quality of it's strenuously lurid in a way that I don't think helps the kind of carny horror, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything else to say.
I did pull up, so
cool. Check it out.
You guys hit that point perfectly.
This episode brought to you by Searchlight Pictures.
It's funny because if anyone were to say that, it's like it wouldn't look good because it took so long for me to pull it up.
Yeah.
Just edit it.
Oh, here we go.
They fool themselves. Nightmare Alley. Only in theaters December 17th.
Oh, that's the short version. Well. Oh, they got the alley. Hey, they've got the alley in there.
They do have the alley. All right.
I will ask you simple questions. You will answer in short sentences only what you believe to be absolute truth.
Absolute truth. I can do that.
Now, brief as you can, what is your name?
Stanton Carlisle.
Are you a true medium?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Carlisle.
Doctor, how about that?
Please lay down.
Can you read minds?
Yes, I can. Under the right circumstances.
Keep your answers brief.
What do I want?
To be found out, same as everybody else.
Are you in contact with the beyond?
Past. We deal with them.
You don't fool people, Stan. They fool themselves.
I've given you a fortune. It's time that you delivered.
When does it end? I want to know.
If you displease the right people, the world closes in on you very, very fast.
All right. Well, we'll see. Okay. I'll be the judge of that.
We don't fool people, Stan. They fool themselves.
So I have to ask this, since we I think did a good job with this with Dune. Do we want to do I guess in either late December or early January, do we want to do a redux of this episode, where once we've had a chance to all watch it, come back and talk about it? Because I would be 100% down for that.
That would be cool.
Sure.
I would love it. Yeah.
Let's we can make this a bit.
Yeah.
Whenever they do a remake, which I always
we have together.
See, I wouldn't want to do that for a lot of remakes, but I like Guillermo del Toro, and I had fun listening to, at least the half of the book I did. And I think it would be a fun movie to talk about.
Well, it'll be interesting no matter what. Even if
I'm interested enough to certainly to watch it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It'll be worth it discussing with.
Absolutely.
So let's in early January probably, because we're gonna do which, Eileen, if you want to be in on any of these, you can. We're gonna do Sci-Fi Month in December.
Oh.
And
wow.
So if you have any ideas about movies you want to be in on 100%. But so early January.
Not Alien. Everyone wants to be on that one. It's
all right.
Yeah.
Understandably.
Your names are too close. Alien, Eileen. Like
I know. The confusion. It would just be hopeless.
No, I just had a friend that is really into the Alien movies. That another one of my friends that's been on this podcast briefly was like, "Oh, you should talk to him." And then Conan's like, "You shouldn't talk to him. We have enough people."
What do you have, like 18 people? All in tiny screen.
It's not going to be that bad, but I'm getting my friend. I guess we're going to announce this. I'm getting my friend Bonnie Burton, who's like sci-fi uber geek royalty. Yeah, and that's going to be really good. And when you have interesting folks on that can speak at length about stuff, the big panels are fun and everything, but you just get a little bit less out of everyone. So it's like if it's more of a party, you can get kind of cool, weird stuff, or like that really weird thing that happened for the Showgirls episode that you did. But like
somebody with 20,000 followers just tweeting it out and saying, "Watch this."
Yeah,
that's what happened with the Showgirls episode.
Watch this chaotic tire fire that does anything like the rest of the show. Yeah.
Wow.
But for me, for my taste, like I think like this is great, right? Like a small panel for this is awesome. Like we get to kind of like have good back and forth, like get everything out and on there. But it's funny, everybody first thing people like, "Oh, what are you doing? Oh, you doing Alien?" We're doing, it's sorry, it's already booked. Like so many people.
Conan's being up to a full co-host for season 2. And this is, we're giving him, and so I'm announcing it now, but we've, this is the last season 1 episode, which, I'm not gonna lie, I had a hard time at first envisioning that people were going to want to necessarily be on every episode of this, and like in general. So the first like 10 episodes or something, I feel like people can kind of in some ways skip, because it's like we had so many people on, but it was also insecurity on my part, being like, I don't know.
You're figuring out what the show was.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna say season 2 might be Where the Hell Did Andrew Go, but Andrew's back, so
what a you know what?
At the end of season 1. Is he okay?
Am I on?
Yeah,
this is fantastic.
Do I sound like a robot?
Why does Conan have long hair and a goatee now?
Yeah,
did he devour Andy? Like
it's like a dark thing.
I was thinking about Kirby.
Oh,
or Kirby just.
That's good.
Yeah. But yeah. So
anyway, I think you're doing final thoughts, right? Was this
no? Yeah. So
final thoughts.
Conan, final thoughts on this? Any final thoughts? I guess about that. That trailer seems it's a completely different movie. It's a completely different story. It has nothing to do with what we just watched.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it'll be a cool movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, so again, I think Nightmare Alley is great. I think it's a great example of sort of however you want to call it as a subgenre. It's a different kind of noir. It shows a lot of things about, you know, the depths that people will go to rise to what they perceive to be heights, and it doesn't do so in a
business.
Doesn't do it in an overtly moralistic or hackneyed way, and it tells a story where, you know, ultimately, like, all the characters that are in this are all pretty well-rounded and have their own arcs. We don't necessarily see all of them, but it runs it walks a tightrope, and it does it, so to speak. It does it very well in a genre that, again, I never really thought about carny noir. But it's like, it is absolutely the quintessential and maybe the only carny noir movie, and I love it. It's great. It's unique. It's interesting.
Once you realize that there is potentially carny noir, you're like, oh fuck, this is where noir 100% could have gone.
I mean, could have gone. It's what to say.
Yeah, you know, let's go, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. The name is Matt. Detective Matt.
Well,
I've known quite a few carnies, and they're fun. They're fun people. They're not people you want to hang out with every day, but you know, they're fun when they come into town in July. And
right.
Well, there was that one show that was sort of trying to do that, and like the David Lynch thing with
what was that?
Ooh, I can't remember. It was in like the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, I'm forgetting now.
It was pretty good. Like, it kind of tried that kind of thing. Anyway,
I was talking about like real life, when, you know, the fair comes the fair comes into town every year in New Paltz, and they, like, every person that I know that mildly sells drugs ends up selling out, and then all of a sudden, like, a few of your friends are like, I'm gonna join the carnival, and then a week later they're back and they're like, I didn't want to join the carnival, that was terrible.
Next thing you know, they came back and they did Time That Summer as a Geek.
They probably were. No, I had a close friend that, like, 1 year when I was 15 or 16, joined the carnival and came back 2 weeks later. It was like, oh no, that is
oh my god.
my ex-girlfriend actually did for a couple weeks too, and was like, no.
Wow.
Sounds like a bad scene. I know exactly 0 people who join the carnival on a temporary or permanent basis.
I didn't know in this day and age, you know, that was a thing. Like, funny way to join the
you still kind of can. It's not. I mean,
apparently
it's worse than it was back then, I think, because now it's like, you know, it's a little bit more aggressive, I think, you know, carnival life, and there aren't like the fun shows where it's like, you know, someone that's kind of a little bit mentally off can join the show, and then, like, it's not like that. It's just, you know, it's just guys that fix rides that are.
I was gonna say fixing the tilt-a-whirl, and
it's like 15 mechanics. It's the carnival now. They're like, hey, I'll fix your car, or I'll fix the ride. I don't know, but, you know. Yeah.
So I love the film. I think that it was a criminal act that it wasn't like taken into consideration for Academy Awards and things along those lines, because it's something, but it's also something where, like, anyone that's willing to search out for movies like this is a nice little treasure, right? It's and like, you can go onto a letterbox or something and get a recommendation for it and be like, oh hell yeah, that kicked ass. I'm so glad, like, I took that recommendation from that person, Conan Neutron, to watch this movie. But you know, it should it be more than a hidden treasure? Yeah, probably. But I think it's kind of interesting enough as it is, and maybe that's okay, right? Maybe it doesn't need to be like. I mean, think of something like Freaks, right? Freaks is a crazy ass movie, but like I feel like Freaks.
Of us.
Exactly, but I feel like it's become
there
like,
can't be any more freaks.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's mainstream in such a way that if I see a movie that tries to do Freaks, I'm like, oh, you're doing Freaks, huh?
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah,
you know, and like it would be a bummer, right? Whereas is that gonna be the case with the Del Toro Nightmare Alley? I don't know. Doesn't look like it. We'll see. I'll find out. Anyway. So last thing is that I'm gonna redux my original opening, which is that you either die a grifter or you live long enough to see yourself become the geek.
Moral of the story. Thank you.
Of the story.
I guess my one thing that I'll bring up at the end is American Horror Story, which you know is a show that I liked up until probably this season that I'm about to mention, the Freak Show season. Like the first 3 seasons I thought were really good, and that 4th season was good, but like wasn't as good. But I think they did take a lot of elements from Nightmare Alley and took a lot of elements from other shows too. Like, you know, not gonna say that was what they really took, you know, ideas from, but I thought it was interesting that, like, looking back on that show and kind of how far that they were able to take it in 2014 or 15. Like, I'm happy this movie couldn't necessarily do that, and I've seen Freaks, and or at least, you know, big parts of the movie Freaks, and controversial movie. This is also a controversial movie, but for different reasons, I'd say. So I don't know. I enjoyed watching this, I think, and well, not I think I did enjoy watching this, but I think that you know, the Tyrone Power thing is interesting to me, like that story behind it, and it also is good that the studio system failed. So that's those are the last. That's the last thought I'll give to this.
I'll have one last. We haven't really done a shout out to Joan Blondell for being so great as Xena.
Oh yeah, and because this was our first foray, basically, into being not a leading lady, but like a character actor, and it's her best, I think.
She's so good, and it's such a great role. I mean, it's almost unheard of for this era to have a woman who's that likable, who's basically saying my weakness is men, and I'm always cheating on my husband, and I've got to save him because of that, and do it in a way that you feel there's no judgment on her, there's no her own judgment on her, but you don't like her less, you like her more.
You want to see a spinoff with just her? Like, what's she up to? What's she doing?
Yeah,
I like that her tarot card reading, right? Like, she kind of throws it out there, and she's like, "Oh, the Hanged Man," and Tyrone Power freaks out, and you're like, "No, this is gonna end up with a Hanged Man situation. Like, there's no way that Tyrone Power wins out in this situation. Like, your tarot reading is going to 100% come out to be accurate."
Yes.
So I liked that part about it too. But
absolutely, and in movies, nobody pulls out a tarot deck, so it will not be true. That just doesn't.
Exactly. It's a trope, and it's the law.
All right. Well, thank you, anyone watching, for sticking with us through 40 episodes. It's fucking insane that we started this in July and we've hit 40 episodes. I mean, you know, we started this also like around the time that I stopped working for Jacobin, which we won't hold against you, but you know.
Thank you.
But you know, I'm really happy this has lasted as long, that we still have ideas, and that, you know, it's grown as much as it has. And I really do feel you know, talking about movies is something that I'm far more comfortable with, I guess, than you know, having to give Ben Burgess my opinions on whatever's happening in politics. So you know what? I consider this a win, and I'm going to say left is best.